Had to resort to video on the iPhone. GoPro is utter crap. Alright, so DR650, RMZ front end, RMZ rear end, complete swing arm, linkage and shock. So the 06 single chamber front end, basically with the 06 triples, these are 07 triples for the 250, but the 06 triples have the same bearing at the bottom, a different bearing at the top. From memory, on the one I did previously, I used the outer race was DR, the inner tapered race was the RMZ. These are 07 triples. There's a 1 mil difference top and bottom, so I bought half mil out of them. There's lugs welded onto the frame there to act as stoppers. You use the standard stopper there. I actually cut a bit off these to give me more lock. So I have slightly more lock than a standard DR. What do we got? The fitting the headlight and everything, I took the standard DR rack. It's got the rings on it that fit around the standard forks. I just cut those off and I cable tied them on because I just couldn't be asked trying to come up with something a little more fancy. I mounted my idiot lights up here. The the ignition barrel just there on a bracket that comes off the bottom of the bolts for the risers. So there's actually it's like a bit of 6 mil plate that I cut up and shaped and bolted on. That's it between the washer and the rubber for the riser. So basically it was to keep it as simple as possible. The ignition barrel, everything works as standard. I've got a longer lock pin I made out of a hardened bolt because it stands off from the steering head a little bit. I didn't want to have to try and modify the upper triple clamp at all in this area, so it butts up against it, and I made a longer pin to fill in that gap. Standard RMZ 06 RMZ 250 front wheel using Motomaster 320mm caliper and the 320mm disc and the caliper adapter bracket. I used all standard RMZ bits for the brake cable. It's an RMZ brake cable as well. What else? Pro taper bars. I bent quite a few sets of standard bars in my experimentation. Right, simplest way to explain this. So this is the entire RMZ swing arm. It has a spacer in there and one in the other side. It uses the same exact size pivot bolt as standard. The spacers were machined. I just cut them up on the lathe. They're just machined to get my chain center line. I'm running a 50 tooth rear and a 16 front at the moment. I was running a 15 front with a 50 rear. Basically what I've done is I've used a standard 120 link chain. I went up in the rear sprocket to try and improve this angle over here. So this is with the tires touching the ground, but there's not, I don't think there's any compression in the suspension. So the that line of the chain with the standard 42 tooth rear sprocket was a lot more pronounced and curved, And what happens is when you get on the throttle, the arse squats, because as this pulls tight, it pushes the swing arm down. So I've gone to a larger rear to try and get rid of that hump and to stop the squat when you get on the throttle, and it seems to have worked quite well. And I did the 120 link chain and did it with this size sprockets because I can use a 15 and still adjust it. I can use a 16, 17, 18 tooth, so I can basically, without having to break links out of the chain, I can do whatever I want. Airbox is gone because the upper shock mount, I cut the old upper shock mount off, fabricated up a new one. The shock mount's dead center, the old DR shock mount's off center. I had to cut the brackets off the bottom as well. I'll just see if I can get this in under there. So, linkage brackets up there off the back of the frame. They're welded to the engine mounts and to that tube across the bottom of the frame, the cross tube, which is pretty thick walled. You can put a ton of heat into it without risking blowing through it. So RMZ shock, RMZ linkage, RMZ swing arm, DR wheel, DR cush drive. I built an 18-inch wheel, that's a 2.5. I did new spokes, new rim, obviously. I did new spokes, new rim on that one. Delkovic muffler, cheap as chips, which is just as well because I dinged it and scratched shit out of it like within 40 minutes of putting it on. That's about, foot pegs. I cut the standard foot pegs off, and I made up some plate and shifted the pegs rearwards and down, welded them back on, shortened the brake lever, shortened the gear lever. That's a cover I bought from a wrecker in the States because I put a hole in mine right before the Cowan Forest ride a few years ago. So it's a lot taller than standard. You can see the length I added into the side stand to keep it leaning the same as standard. And the 25 litre tank, plumbing for those is crap. I hate it because it's always really difficult to get the plumbing to work with filters. I end up having to use the little tiny inline filter like that. I don't like those. I wanted to use a larger metal canister filter, but I couldn't get fuel to flow through it. The width of the bash plate scrubs and wears on the bottom edges, like down around that area. Gets a considerable amount of wear in deep ruts. You can see it better on this side. Oh yeah. My knees aren't what they used to be there. So you drop it into deep ruts and basically it'll just center itself with the bash plate and slide along in the rut. This is a better version of the B&B. The original B&B that they made for these things, I destroyed one of them. I took this whole side of it off, smashed the frame rail in, shattered the cover. So I ended up, I saw that they'd come up with a new design. I quite like this one. It seems to work very, very well. And the B&B rear rack. I've been playing around with my giant loop saddlebag, so I've got to come up with something better. These look like good spinal adjusters, but the giant loop bag sits on here. It pushes back far enough to give me room to sit, and straps to these and down to these. All in all, yeah, it's it's like riding a great big RMZ. Basically, the only part of this that hasn't been modified is the internals of the engine. I have put a new clutch in it because I worked the living daylights out of the old clutch and I thought it was starting to play up. I fitted a new heavy duty clutch and it's been perfect. So yeah, like, you'd be surprised just how capable you can make one of these things and how far you can take it and how hard you can push it. Really, the limitation is entirely me. Like, I've followed 300s around the forest, going over fallen trees and rocks and doing ruts and steep climbs, and I think everyone's been impressed with just how well this thing works. And yeah, I built it back in 2009-ish. I've built 3 versions. This one and another DR. I've had a conventional RMZ 1999 conventional dual chamber fork on the front with the RMZ triples, and I built my own ignition lock system and stuff again, and I used a 320mm motard disc and caliper spacer bracket, and I built another one with 07 dual chamber USD forks on the front, and I prefer the 06 single chamber. I don't know why, I just do. I found the 07s, I was always working on them. Like, I used to wear seals out and wear bushes out, and they're basically the same size bushes and stuff. There's not a great deal of difference, but these seem to last longer. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.